Jer si milostiv i čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods are high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure. This podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. The powers haunt the evening in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep on the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
If you're one of those people like us who love to study and research the ancient documents alongside with the Hebrew and Christian ancient papyri and the scriptures, you came to the right space and right time, because we'll be dissecting Canaanite mythology tonight. Namely, Paul helped us in the past to dissect it was Babylonian mythology, where we were comparing and dissecting these their sacred manuscripts and comparing them to the Old Testament. So we'll be doing something very similar tonight, but we'll be switching to the Canaanite mythology, and which honestly have a very which had very influential texts when it comes to the biblical authors, and soon we will see why is that. So welcome to episode 161. I'm so happy to welcome our dear friend Paul back on the podcast. Paul, thank you so much for finding time in your busy schedule for myself and for the audience. If you want to maybe briefly reintroduce yourself before we start diving into the topic.
Hi, friend. It's good to be back with you again and sharing here tonight on an interesting topic that relates to the Bible and studies. It's been a little while, so some changes. Basically, I've been working at a church. I'm currently in a season of looking to go deeper in pastoral ministry and on the hunt for my next step in ministry with God. I've got some seminary education under my belt, and I love reading and connecting things. And this all started with the work of Dr. Michael Heiser, who we connected with in the Divine Council Worldview, which I think we're going to touch on tonight. And I look forward to examining these stories and see how they can be helpful for us.
Also, before we start dissecting the material, I want to apologize for all my misspoken words, including when I say welcome to space and stuff like that. I have been dealing with sleep depravity, so people have to give me special grace tonight. But again, we have some amazing, very interesting material when it comes to the Divine Council, when it comes to the Canaanite pantheon, and their legends, and how do they relate to certain Old Testament characters, narrative, stories, including their manuscripts. How did they see that? I spent some time researching the influence of the East Semitic and West Semitic materials when it comes to the canon of the Old Testament. And I was slightly surprised, but I already knew something, that both the East and West Semitic documents and mythologies inspired certain Old Testament authors, especially Moses, when he was writing portions of the Old Testament. He wrote the Pentateuch, right? And how he was using that material not to copy paste, but to use for the sake of polemics and to point everyone to Yahweh. So this episode will be diving with two, maybe even the most famous Canaanite documents. They have to deal with the Baal cycle. I know that some of you like to be pronounced Baal, so either way it should be fine. And the other one has to do with the legend of King Keret, or another name is Epic of Kirta. Paul, when it comes to the first one, when it comes to the Baal or Baal cycle, when it comes about the history, about the dating, about the tablets, is there anything that is missing from the data that the archaeologists have excavated?
That's a good question. So as far as ancient Near East studies or biblical studies go, the information we have on this stuff is very recent. We're talking 1920s, 1930s. And we have these names listed and some fragments from other material, the Bible material, but we've uncovered quite a bit that has needed to be translated compared to things like Mesopotamian, Babylonian research or Egypt. We have much, much less, and this is much, much newer. And it was found pretty much by accident. I think it was 1928. A farmer was plowing in the field and hit something, and then they found a bunch of pottery shards and other things and started excavating and found a funeral site with a number of items. And probably the most interesting thing is at this site, they have documents in 4 different languages. And so it shows a lot of influence in the area, a lot of changes, and they basically uncovered a new language. Once they got into it, it was cuneiform, which is a press. You take like a stylus and press it into clay tablets to make marks, and those marks make characters, and then you build a language out of it. But what they figured out is that the cuneiform was different from what we had from Mesopotamia, either Sumerian or Akkadian, Old Babylonian. So they had to figure out what this new thing is. I believe a professor in Paris, France, sort of summarized and figured out there was 26 or 27 symbols, which isn't too bad. And then from there, they were able to lay out the text and see these documents. Now, one thing that's going to affect at least how I'm going to describe things tonight, with cuneiform tablets, they're about the size of your palm. They're a chunk of clay that they press the marks into, and then they fire them and they become hard as stone. That is great because it lasts a long time. Stone's hard, it weathers very well. But what does tend to happen with these is that the edges, or depending on how they're laid, parts of it can be broken or worn off. And in some cases, we have very good text that's continuous. And in some places, we got some parts that are missing. And sometimes it's just a little bit, sometimes it's quite a lot. And so that's going to come up later. And it affects kind of the order that we read these in. And we'll address that later as we get into the actual stories. But there's a little bit of variation in how they're read or how they're put together. And still some debate, from what I understand, even on how you order the stories. We're going to discuss the most kind of common order that I think has been accepted, and we'll deal with some of the jumps. But part of what we're going to talk about will be very general because of that, because of the information we have. And then there's a few details we want to get into more specifically because they have ties to the Bible and some things we can compare. So we need to be more detailed that way.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. I think it's very important for people who are into history and archaeology. Like, give us first the data, the dating, the setting, things like that, so they can start from there. So in my research, I found out that the Baal cycle, which was a West Semitic sea myth, had a profound influence on the biblical traditions or authors, just like Enumelish had when it comes to the East Semitic traditions. What I found out that the Baal cycle or Baal cycle has 6 tablets. There are 3 stories in it. A lot of the text is missing. So I don't know if you want to start expounding the first one when Baal starts fighting against the sea serpent or the sea deity Yam. I don't know if that's where you want to start.
Yeah, let's take a minute too, just to put the location we talked about. Can you throw up the map, especially maybe the one with the Phoenicians? So
Yeah, just
where?
a second.
Yeah. So as Nico pulls that up, so Ugarit is fairly far north where we found these, and because of where it is, so over here on the right, on the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, people might be familiar with Tyre and Sidon. There's the modern day Beirut, and north of that was also the ancient city of Byblos. Those were very important cities in Phoenicia. Phoenicia is kind of the north of Canaan or Canaan, and it's named after the purple dye that they used to trade and get there. So on this map on the right-hand side, Ugarit would be even further north than where Byblos is marked, kind of at the top of that red region there. Because of where it is between the Mediterranean Sea, the Egyptians would send ships up the coast and do trade with it and contact them. But then you also had a lot of cultures come from the east and northeast that interacted in this area. So we talk about this. The other part about Ugarit, as we can see, is the Phoenicians spread. They were great sailors. And so they expanded and put settlements all the way across North Africa, into Spain. And we have some thought, it's debated, that they may have even reached Britain. So with Ugarit, as we get more details, we've had some cultic items and architecture from these areas that show off a Phoenician or Canaanite style. But with these discoveries starting in 1928, we know more about their stories that we didn't have before. And that's going to be what we're talking about next.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Nico. Yeah, so before we get to the story, I'm going to do a quick recap of some of the characters because some of these names come up in other texts. Mm-hmm. And then as we're tracking along with parts, we can kind of talk about the characters and come back. So as per the name of the cycle or the collection of stories that's put together, the main character is Baal or Baal, sometimes called Baal Hadad. And he is a god of storm, of fertility, and of kingship. He becomes the ruler during the story. At the beginning, he is not. It's very interesting. It seems like he's in line for the throne, and then it goes sideways, and then he becomes the king later on. And we'll talk about that. There's another major character named Yam. Yam is actually the Hebrew word for sea. In these stories, he is a character, a person. He's the god of sea, of chaos, and rivers, and he's generally a symbol of disorder. Later in the cycle, you have Mot. Mot is the god of death and the underworld. Mot, again, is the Hebrew word for death, so it's shared. You have El, or El, who is the chief god and probably the creator. We actually don't have a creation myth from the Canaanites, whether it's missing or whether we haven't found it yet. We don't have that. But somehow El seems to be the head god or the first one. But he's also kind of mentioned in passing. He's not a major player, which is here. You also have Anat, who is Baal's sister wife. They're consorts, but also a sister. She is, I would call her a goddess of passion. She is seen as a warrior, but there isn't a lot of strategy. It's more unbridled passion in combat. And then she's also tied to fertility in the sense of, for lack of a better word, lust. It's not love per se. It's more the passionate side. And she represents both those two things. She's also a warrior, and that comes into play in the story. You have Asherah or Athiret, who is a type of mother goddess. She's also sort of related to water and the ocean, but in a different way from Yam. She's often the consort of El, but she seems to have some other relationships as well. And then the other character that I find really interesting is a god, or at least a divine craftsman named Kothar Wakahasis. He makes a number of weapons. He's also put in charge of building palaces for Yam and Baal. I find this interesting because we find this name exactly the same in a number of Egyptian texts. And in the story, it seems like Kothar lives in Egypt. Whether they just thought the best stuff was made in Egypt, and so that's high quality, or if there's a shared story or a spirit moving that's represented in both of these. He is in both places and shared in some other stories. So those are the background characters, or those are the main characters, and they're going to play into the stories that we talk about first.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So maybe we can start first with his fight against Yam. I don't want to spoil, but I do want to comment once when you start talking about the weapons being forged. Then I want to say a thing or two.
Yeah, they have some interesting names, and we'll get there. That's towards the end of the story. So as best as we can tell in the Baal cycle, there's at least 3 subdivisions of stories, possibly 4. The first tablet, or the first clear part we have, is towards the end of column 3 or column 4. On a tablet, they would be subdivided into vertical columns where the words would be written, and the beginning is very badly damaged. So when it picks up, there's already an establishment of a kingship to be determined, and it seems like Baal was in place to have this, but Yam is taking over. He's given the kingship, or he's taking the kingship as it goes. I'll read some clips here in a second. Basically, Yam is declared king by El, and because of this, Yam demands that Baal is delivered to him. He wants Baal to be his servant, and he wants all of Baal's gold. It's power, right? Baal refuses. He's not going down without a fight. He thinks he's the rightful ruler. He has weapons made by Kothar, and with these he defeats Yam. And then Baal ascends to the throne. Let me grab a document here. Part of what I'm going to be reading from is a summary by J.C.L. Gibson in Canaanite Myth and Legends. He has the full stories of a number of myths, but he also summarizes them very well. So as we're doing this starts in column 3. So the craftsman of the gods has been summoned to by the supreme god El, and he's asked to build a palace for Prince Yam, who is also called Judge Nahar. The word Nahar in Hebrew means river, so he had the sea and the river, and to do it quickly. And then in the middle of this, you have a discussion between some gods about the rulership and power of Yam, and they don't like it. They're not a fan of him coming into power. And then there is somehow Yam gets wind of this going on, that the other gods are not going to support him, and there is a banquet and a number of the gods are there. Yam ends up sending 2 messengers to the gods to basically tell them to get in line. You better cooperate, or you're getting a beatdown. Is the story, and yeah, El actually welcomes them, but the other ones, especially Baal, isn't going to go along with this. The messengers also tell the gods that Baal is supposed to be delivered as a slave. There's a condition of surrender, and El actually agrees with it. He says, "Yep, no problem. Baal is going to be your servant. Just take him away." But again, Baal is not going down, and he tells the gods that we got to stand up to this, and I'm not going to do it. And they seem divided. They actually are very divided. What happens after this is that Kothar believes that Yam has taken power unrightfully, that it doesn't fit. He does not build the palace he was supposed to, and instead joins the side of Baal. In this, Baal is given he's given a couple of weapons. Baal seems to have weapons, but he's also given more. So he takes out the messengers with a couple of flaming swords, and does it. And then he's also given some weapons by Kothar, and he goes off to challenge Yam.
Do we know how to pronounce these 2 weapons? Because I think the first one would be pronounced Yagrush, and the second one Aimur, right?
Yeah, that's probably pretty close. Basically, what they are, if you translate that down, is it's the thunderclap and the lightning bolt.
So, see, when I was reading this, it just reminded me of one of those finest fantasy role-play games, RPG games. And it's funny how Baal, he didn't feel strong enough or powerful enough. So he went to this guy, the divine craftsman, Kothar Ba Kassis, whatever is, I don't know the vowels to pronounce, but that's basically his name. So he went to Kothar and he asked for help. And Kothar was, making these 2 weapons for him, like I said, Yagrush and Aimur. And I was thinking, like, this looks pretty much when you're given a quest in an RPG game and you're not powerful enough, so you go maybe do some side quests and then you get stronger and you're going to face the boss. That's what it reminded me. But then I was also thinking, how dare we compare Baal to Yahweh, who like couldn't even defeat like the sea serpent? And we read in the Bible that Yahweh was more than potent, more than powerful to do that. So that was one of the first things that when I was reading, I was like, it's a cool story, but like this divine pantheon, divine council of Canaanites was very messed up. There was no harmony, there was no agreement among the deities, and we'll see later in the legend of King Kirta or Keret, depending on pronunciation. Like they were even working against each other. So from the very get-go, we see the divine council mentioning the Ugaritic and the Canaanite pantheon does not match the biblical, and also the powers that Yahweh displaying his supremacy over other deities, including the sea serpent or later death, is way differently explained than how Baal is fighting Yam and later Mut. But I don't want to steal your thunder. I don't want to go too much ahead. I just want to say that from this portion, from this point, the story gets even more exciting with those 2 huge clubs. Again, it's like in those video games.
Yeah. These are like maces or hammers of some kind, and do it. I find it real interesting actually because Kothar actually gives the weapons instructions, and the one hammer at least is commanded to leap to the hand of Baal. I think of like Mjolnir, right, flying to the hand of Thor at the same time. It's a thunder hammer too, which I think is really interesting. Yeah, some of these ideas that seem to be repeated or show up again in other stories. Yeah. So what we basically have is a fight at this point, and with the great thunder hammer and lightning bolt, Baal is able to defeat Yam, and to make sure he's taken care of and can't come back and retaliate. Baal chops up Yam into a bunch of pieces. Now, Astarte had come along with Baal somehow. So he seems to have some other people with him, but he's in the fight. And Baal gets rebuked for cutting up or taking care of Yam this way. And they say like you shouldn't have done that. And Baal's response is basically, "Oh yeah," and he cuts up Yam into a bunch of smaller pieces on top of that. Just he's gonna have his way, and this is a done deal. You can't tell me anything. Absolutely. So Yam is dead at this point. He's all chopped up. He's been defeated. So Baal is the rightful king, and they're going to rise up on this, and that's how Baal becomes the king of the gods, essentially.
Yeah, it's a very cool story, and like we said, this is one of the first 3 or 4 stories. They're part of the Baal or Baal cycle, and now that story switches into Baal or Baal getting his royal palace. I don't know if you want to just maybe briefly summarize that part before we start into the 3rd section where Baal is fighting Mot.
Yeah, so there's a story here in the middle where Baal gets his palace. So in short, Baal, now that he's victorious, he's become the rightful king by combat. He wants to build a royal palace, and because of this, have his authority shown. There's a bunch of back and forth with El, Asherah, and Anat and Baal, and eventually he convinces everybody he needs this palace. The palace is constructed, but without windows. It seems like Baal wants this fortress that no one can get into. I think he's worried about other threats. Later on, there are windows that are added. And then with the completion of the palace by Kothar, Baal then takes the seat as the king of the gods. Especially because he's got this storm profile, he oversees the growth and the giving of rain and fertility to help people as well. What I find really interesting in this one is that there's a good chunk about Baal, and ultimately it's about Baal becoming the king of the gods. But Anat plays a very, very big part in this section of the story. And it's very strange. I'm going to keep it PG as much as possible here. But this is where we see her passion to say, the story actually kind of starts with her being dressed up. She's got special clothing and makeup, and she describes her being scented, and she walks out of her mansion and meets some servants. And when you have this, she basically, in the middle of it, goes into full passion mode out of nowhere. She goes to meet some servants, and as soon as she meets them, she kills them. And then it gets worse. She girds herself up, and there's this big battle, and it's something out of like a manga comic book, actually, is like what reminds me. So she's described as taking like heads and feet and heads, and she's putting them on her back and on her belt. And at one point it says like the blood and gore is like up to her neck. So you can think about her as this goddess of passion, is that this is just all out warfare. People are going nuts and being killed all over the place. And it really seems like this is all happening just because she's in a mood as she's doing it. But she's not really satisfied. She finishes. There are some guards that survive. So she goes back to her mansion and she throws a feast and invites the guards that are left over to come have part of this feast. And as she prepares for the feast, she washes her hands in blood and does it. But despite this, she's not quite, she's sort of satisfied and is calmed, but then she gets into this mood again. And Baal hears about this and invites him to come be with him and just be like, yeah, come have peace with me. Come join me and do it. So she goes. But when she arrives, what happens is Baal basically starts whining, saying, hey, I don't have a palace. I don't have a palace, and I don't know what to do about it. And, could you actually go talk to El for me and tell him I need a palace, right? So Baal doesn't even ask for it himself, which is funny. Anat goes to El, and she essentially ends up threatening him. She goes like, hey, listen, like my brother, my consort doesn't have a palace. Clearly he's the king. You better build a palace for him. And Al was just like, yeah, okay, just go ask Kothar. Tell Daddy I want a house. Yeah. And she like threatens to smash in his head if he doesn't compromise, and he does. So they go through with doing this. But there's a weird loop in the story where, despite having permission, neither of them get the palace built. So then they go to talk to Asherah and ask for the same thing and say, hey, can you go tell El I need a palace and have him built? And she says, why don't you go yourself? But they convince her to go talk. And Asherah eventually goes to talk to El and say, yeah, you should build a palace for him. And he's like, okay, I already said okay, so build this thing. So eventually you get a message, and all the complaining and everything that's through is this this palace is built. Kothar starts to build it and has a craftsman, and there's lots of silver, lots of gold, absolutely magnificent. But like you said, they build this thing without any windows. It seems like Baal is afraid of intrusion. Yeah. Eventually, he changes his mind. Also, somewhere in the middle of this, it's not quite clear to me, Baal ends up with some daughters. And they're basically the morning dew and mist. There's a water element, especially water that relates to agriculture. And so these are his daughters. Long story short, eventually this palace is built. They go through a couple versions of it. Kothar makes it, and Baal and his daughters are able to live here. And this is where he starts to reign. An interesting note is that this is related to Zaphon, which is, if you've followed Michael Heiser, the north, or the place where the gods meet, that is related to this palace as well.
Yeah, I prepared an article to read a little bit later about Mountain Zaphon, but also want to say, like, here's another example of this, of the Canaanite divine council, where El he keeps showing his imperfections, his weaknesses. Like, he's allowing to be threatened, and he's backing off. Like, hey, if you're the leader of this clan, of this gang, you better put yourself together and, like, show them your power and something. He's like compromising, showing his weakness. He's not alpha dog anymore in this pack. Like, very different than what we see in the Bible. And we'll keep analyzing this pantheon and the chief deity El, who is soon replaced by Baal. We'll keep analyzing their attributes and their powers, as well as their flaws, and comparing to Yahweh, because that's the core of this episode. But yeah, I was disappointed. I'm like, dude, like, you didn't hold your ground. You got scared by all these goddesses, but whatever. Okay, and then the third story comes, which is as cool as the first one. In this story, Baal, I don't know what happened with his power clubs. They're not there anymore. but Baal is fighting another enemy who may be even more powerful, because at least for a season he loses. Can you please tell us more about it?
Yeah, so at the end of the last story, one of the things that happens is that Baal kind of all settled in now. He invites Moat to come to a feast to acknowledge the kingship of Baal, or the sovereignty. But there's also quite a lot of Moat is very powerful, including sort of eating the sun out of the sky, and it goes to this dark place. Moat is the god of the underworld and all the darkness and things to do with death. But Baal wants to one up him as well, right? This very powerful being. It doesn't go very well. He gets invited, but ultimately it leads to conflict in this title. So as a summary, let me go back here. So Moat ultimately is angered by Baal's supremacy and this invitation. He doesn't respect Baal. Moat demands that Baal descends to the underworld. Baal reluctantly goes. He seems to actually be a little afraid of this. And ultimately, in the fight and struggle, he's consumed by Moat. What happens is that fertility and rain cease when this happens. This seems to be related to the cycle of drought and the agricultural failure, droughts and winter. Anat, Baal's sister consort, who we've talked about, grieves, and she goes after him. And eventually she slays Moat and recovers Baal's body and brings him back to life. So that Baal can be triumphant and return again. However, it seems that even in slaying Moat and scattering his remains, he tends to come back. He can't keep the death god down. And so there's this over and over struggle between Baal and Moat, which seems to be connected to the cycle of the seasons as well. Yeah, is there anything? That's the gist of it, is that Moat is very powerful and Baal wants kingship, but they struggle. And this whole thing takes place in the underworld here. There's also a time in the middle of the story, actually, Leviathan comes up as well, kind of out of nowhere. But Moat threatens to cause the heavens to wilt and collapse, and take away Baal's power in this sense. He says that Baal is just going to be another dead person in the underground domain. Baal talks about Moat is described as a giant animal of sorts. So Baal confesses his fear and dread of Moat, including his gaping jaws, which he must enter because they encompass both earth and heaven, reaching to the very stars. So Moat, or death, is pictured at least as this giant mouth or this consuming animal. Yeah, he goes to meet him, and they have this fight. They also talk about Baal having a substitute that gets slain by Moat, but a sort of there's a life force in it. So this doppelganger for Baal loses, and that's why Anat has to go find his body again afterwards to be restored. Anat goes through mourning and then follows him into the underworld, and then with the help of Shepash, they're able to bring Baal back and restore him to Mount Zaphon. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also like to say a couple of stuff when I was researching about this. So in this last story of the Baal cycle, As we heard from Paul, Mot wins against Baal and sends him in the underworld. And here comes the side effects of Baal not being present in, at least in that reality. He's not present as the sky deity who is in charge of rain and land fertility. The earth begins to suffer. Baal or Baal is absent, so now fertility, the land does not show fertility or cannot reproduce crops as it did before. So now the chief deity El is dreaming of the land being restored. And then he takes it as confirmation of Baal's right to kingship. He's like, that's probably a sign. Baal probably belongs upstairs, so to speak. So, like Paul said, they sent for Baal to be, in a way, resurrected. Baal manages to escape the underworld, and then he's about to fight Mot again, the god of the underworld, the god of death. But then El's messenger comes and tells Mot that El would be against Mot if he wins in a duel. And why is that? Well, because of the dream that El had about Baal, that he is supposed to be there as the sky deity to be back to his rightful place. Thus, Mot withdraws from this fight because he doesn't want to deal with El. And then when Baal is back to his place, then he's sending rain on the earth, crops are growing, land becomes fertile again. And some scholars are understanding this part of the Baal cycle to be something that will be resembling all the four seasons, agriculture, to basically show that, hey, it is a mythological story, but it's basically telling us about all these seasons, changes, crops, growth, agriculture, and stuff like that. What I also find here is another flaw in these Canaanite deities. Baal, again, cannot win against another deity. If he couldn't win against Yam, he needed help from this Kotar Bakasis, the divine craftsman. Let's call him a blacksmith for a second. He needed those fiery clubs to smack Yam into small pieces. Okay, now he's dealing with Mot. He loses the first time. The second time, he gets saved because the messenger of El comes and stops the fight. So in both of these stories, we see that El is lacking because he's backing off when Baal's palace needs to be built. Baal cannot defeat any of these strong two opponents. So I think this is important when people want to compare ancient stories and ancient documents that are coming from the pagan world to the Bible, and they will many times say, well, see, the Bible stole this, or the Bible plagiarized this. That's a heavy statement with not so much data as backup, as evidence. There's many similarities. There are many, and we will assess later, epithets that Baal, for example, and Yahweh shared, or they had the same attributes, like, for example, the rider in the clouds. But it's not simple copy paste. So we'll be assessing this very soon. I just want to say that also, it's not Baal that is also lacking. Here, Alli is lacking. Why? Because he was not, he was the creator, right? But he was not able to sustain the creation without Baal's help. So when Baal was in the underworld, suffering, dying, whatever, the creation was suffering. There was no rain, crops were not growing, the land was probably getting dry, it couldn't grow crops. So El could not fix that. He needed help of Baal to come back and take his position so that he will do his part in creation. So in a way, El was impotent to do Baal's job. What kind of a head of a pantheon does that? Because Yahweh doesn't lack anything. Yahweh does not need anyone. So for me, this was like just another sign, like, wow, there are so many fascinating symbolism parallels. Also, when we did a couple of years ago with Babylonian mythology and the Bible, and now with the Canaanite mythology and the Bible. But beware, it's not as easy as copy paste. There's so many differences in these narratives. I don't know if you want to comment on that, and then I also want to start reading from my notes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place is that there are similarities. there was a shared culture in place, and I very much think that the biblical writers were aware of some of these stories, but they're actually taking it and changing it. Or I like to talk about in the spiritual world that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, that there's the truth of God Almighty, but it gets twisted in other ways as well. And there's even things I didn't say this in the end. At the end of the story here with Baal and Moat, there's actually a thing about a 7-year cycles. After 7 years, Moat comes back to try to challenge Baal again. It reminds me, you talk about fertility and it stops, but then when Baal comes back, it's the opposite. To me, this Moat challenging Baal after 7 years and the rise of death again is the exact opposite of the Sabbath year that was asked for by the Israelites, where you're not going to sow anything, but God will provide for you for in the 7th year over and over again, right? So I think it's a little hasty for people to say that, followers of the Bible, Israelite religion is the same as everything else, because if you actually read the story, it seems to be quite the opposite, even though it's the same language. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that portion. So I'll be just now reading and we'll be dissecting together from my notes. So when it comes to the Baal cycle or Baal cycle, if we would further compare it to the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, Baal is mentioned 58 times in the Bible. 19 times is Baals and plural because the word simply means Lord or Master. But they will always denote pagan deities when they're mentioned in the Bible. Baal is the sovereign of all the gods and is portrayed as a good ordering god in the Baal cycle. This is very interesting because no wonder that Baal is trying to compete with Yahweh for the territory, because he's also trying to portray himself. Hey, I'm trying to put this in order. I'm trying to grow crops. I'm trying to give you guys rain. I'm trying to bless you. So, you better come and worship me. So Israel was deceived, but they were not just deceived as easy as like, oh, look, this is, let's say, the devil or the Satan. They wouldn't use those words. I'm just giving any words so for the audience can understand now. It wasn't as easy as that. They were like seeing how, probably the heathens, the pagans were blessed, or maybe, how the covenant they had with Baal was working. So for them, when they compared it with Yahweh, maybe for them, in a way, it made sense because they were confused. They were deceived by seeing maybe some parallels. And in no way they're supposed to be excused, because Yahweh told them multiple times not to go after all these gods, not to build them, shrines on high places. Yet they did. Also, in the Canaanite myth, Baal fulfills many functions that Yahweh does in the Bible. Baal's attributes sometimes match those of Yahweh. For example, Baal is in the Canaanite divine council among other divine beings. He is called as the rider on the clouds, just as Yahweh is in the Old Testament. He has the rightful divine kingship, just like Yahweh. And then the above mentioned fight against the sea serpent Yam, because we know that Yahweh defeats the chaos serpent, and he will defeat the ultimate expression of it. Let's say it comes from Genesis 1, then is portrayed in through Leviathan, then through Satan, the great serpent. Some scholars even think that Psalm 29 was originally a hymn to Baal, but that was altered for Yahweh. I don't know if you heard about this, Paul. If you would like to comment, we can briefly read this. Read Psalm 29. It's not that long, if you agree.
Sure. I want to make a comparison to Psalm 24 as well. Do you have the text for Psalm 29 ready?
Yeah. Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon leap like a calf, Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the desert. The Lord shakes the desert of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. or bear. And in his temple all cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. I also want to say that in verse 6, when it's talking about this location, Sidon, that is actually the proper name is Mount Hermon, which is very important when it comes to the uh, ancient cosmology, not only of the Hebrews, but also of the other nations around the ancient Israel, because supposedly it was Mount Hermon where the watchers, the fallen ones in Genesis 6, fell and plotted to pollute the humankind, and we see this in the Enochian material. So besides the mountain Hermon found in verse 6, um, I have not read the Baal cycle or extensively any scholarship on the mythology of Baal, but I know that you read more than me. So I don't know if anything in these 11 verses, if it reminds you of anything you read when it comes to the Canaanite pantheon and Baal himself.
I mean, there's some shared language there for sure, and phrases that are repeated, but I think there's also a contrast, right? Like, um, did Baal have authority because he spoke? No, he had to be. I mean, he was telling people what to do, and they didn't listen to him. But here, our Lord thunders, and He's the one in control, and that's why we ascribe glory to His name, right? It's there are shared places, there are shared traits, but just the majesty and the control is quite a bit different. But as we talked about the thunder hammer and the lightning and these battles, I hear it ring in those writings, but the outcome of this, what's actually going on, is quite a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine what the scholars are trying to say here, that like probably if they would compare Psalm 29 with some of the Canaanite tablets, they would find similar attributes and characteristics described to Baal that here are ascribed to Yahweh. So that's what I'm getting, because we already mentioned king, divine rightful kingship in both of these deities. They're both cloud riders and some other things, also becoming head of their own divine councils, pantheons, and stuff like that. Also, the Lord here it says he thunders over the mighty waters, and we know that Baal was in charge of the sky, of the thunder, of the weather, and things of that sort. So yeah, I can recognize some of the parallels. Certainly not all, because I didn't read extensively, but I can see why would they think. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen for now, and I want to continue reading. This is very interesting because just for a minute, we'll switch briefly to the New Testament, because in Matthew 12, something interesting is happening. Namely, in Matthew 12:24, Jesus is accused of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, the ruler of demons. Beelzebub is a name derived from Baal Zebub, a Philistine god. So, but 3 verses later, in verse 27, Jesus calls Satan Beelzebub, linking the devil to Beelzebub, or Baal, a Philistine deity. And this is to be cross-referenced to 2 Kings 1:2. So no wonder then that in Old Testament, so many times God would have to warn the Israelites, not simply against any other deity. Yes, that too, but many times against Baal, or in plural, Baals. Lord and or master, or lords and masters of these heathens. Do not go, do not mingle with them, do not bow your knee to them, do not worship them, do not idolize them, do not bring their statues or idols in your home, do not deal with Baal. So no wonder, because Jesus identifies Baal to Satan himself. Do you want to briefly comment on this? Because I want to mention some other biblical parallels to the Baal cycle. Or you're good?
Yeah, it's a matter of context. First of all, I think because of the spiritual world, there's overlap here, but this also shows a blindness to what was going on and the scope and extent. Think about Matthew. Obviously, the teachers did not understand who Jesus was, and practically speaking, we could think that they didn't really understand who Yahweh was and what they've been told for hundreds of years. They weren't following this very well. The other part of this, as far as the Philistines go, they come into the area later. So some of the names we won't get in these Ugaritic texts because most likely there's some debate on what's going on, but there's pretty good evidence now that the Philistines came from the Sea Peoples that invaded at the Bronze Age collapse, and that's the same time that Ugarit collapsed. And so they would not have been in the same time period for writing and communication, but as a representation of the overall area of Canaan and what was going on. There's similarities, and you can hear it in the names. There's shared language. This is probably a different hypostasis of another spirit, or something that's represented the same way.
Yeah, thank you for that. Couple of things which I drew from intertextual.bible website, which is a very cool website. I recently discovered that compares the different ancient Near East documents and manuscripts to the biblical manuscripts and tries to find parallels in, I don't know, grammar, wording, anything that will help us contextually to compare any ancient document to the Bible. So this is very interesting. I'm going to read always first from the Baal cycle, and then I will give some Old Testament parallels. So, for example, there's a section in Baal cycle that says, a throne is arranged, and he takes a seat at the right hand of the mightiest Baal, as the gods dine and drink. Mightiest Baal declares, hurry, the house, Kothar, quickly construct the palace. You must promptly build the house. You must swiftly construct the palace on the peak of Sapan. Let the house span 1,000 fields, the palace 10,000 hectares. Now, if we're switching to some other passages in the Bible, especially Psalm 48:2, this is what we're getting. The Lord is great and certainly worthy of praise in the city of our God, his holy hill. It is lofty and pleasing to look at, a source of joy to the whole earth. Mount Zion resembles the peaks of Zaphon, and this Zaphon is the same thing as Sapan mentioned in the Baal cycle, just spelled a little bit differently. It is the city of the great king. God is in its fortress. He reveals himself as its defender. For look, the kings assemble, they advance together. So this is the first interesting part when it comes to further analysis and parallels. And I'm going to read a little bit. I'm on the website gotquestions.org about Mountain Zaphon in the Bible. So the word literally means north. Twice the word is used to refer to a city in Gad on the east bank of the river Jordan. In these two passages, we're not told anything specific about the city. Zaphon is simply used as a landmark. Okay, now they're giving parallels between King James Version and ESV when it comes to this Psalm 48:2, which we read. King James Version would say, beautiful in its loftiness, the joy of the whole earth. Like the heights of Zaphon is Mountain Zion, the city of the great king. ESV would say, beautiful in elevation is the joy of all the earth, Mountain Zion, in the far north. So they would not leave Zaphon as Zaphon, they would translate as north. And here, this is maybe the only time in my life where I would prefer King James Version over any other modern translation, because I think it theologically helps a lot if we are left with Zaphon, because when it comes to cosmic geography and this spiritual warfare, Zaphon helps us to connect the dots better than if we're reading an English translation and if we don't know Hebrew, so we're just reading in the far north. That most probably will not tell us anything when it comes to cosmic geography. While this is a possible explanation for Zaphon being equated with Jerusalem in the ESV, it also seems that the term Zaphon was used in the Canaanite literature to refer to a cosmic mountain par excellence in northwestern Semitic regions. It may be that the biblical author in Psalm 48:2 is making a conscious comparison between one of the Canaanite sacred places, Baal Zaphon, and the most sacred place in Israel. In other words, it is not Baal Zaphon where God can be encountered, but Mountain Zion. And now in Isaiah 14:13, the king of Babylon says, I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. This seems to use the term Zaphon in the same way that Psalm 48:2 does. However, the interpretation is complicated by the context. Some see this passage as referring to Satan. Okay, so we'll skip this. I just wanted to read this section when it comes to explanation of the cosmic geography, that Zaphon or Zapon being used both in the Old Testament and in the Ugaritic text. It helps us when it comes to the context, so we can see the parallels. Like, hey, it is not a coincidence that we're talking about Mount Hermon, we're talking about Mount Zapon or Zaphon, we're talking about Mount Zion. The Lord, just like the gods with small g, gods of this world and of the pagan pantheons, they had their own locations, they had their own mountains. God's location, let's say that it was first, with Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden on a mountain. Then later it switched to Mountain Zion. But I think it was first Zion and then it switched to Zion. But nonetheless, I just want to say how in cosmic geography, if you were an ancient Israelite, when you were reading this, you would not just merely read them as, oh, this is a mountain, no big deal. You read them as places of theological importance, because who is dwelling on which mountain, who is declaring war to whom, who is going to be attacked where, who is going to lose or win war at certain location. This, to the ancient readers, this will give them deep theological meanings, unlike us reading some translation saying, oh, it was far north. It doesn't tell me anything. So I just appreciate any context that helps us understand deeper this so-called spiritual warfare between Yahweh and Baal. Would you like to comment on this before I continue?
Yeah, I do, because there's one more thing that I found in this new reading. In part of the Baal cycle, the Mount of Assembly is also referred to as the pronunciation with the vowels is a little bit hard, but it could be Mount Lala, Mount Layla, or Mount Lel, which basically translates to the mountain of night. And I think that tells us about the mountain, and I also think that's kind of creepy. But it tells you, in what you read, if we compare this, I think you've got Mount Zion and the mountain of righteousness and the mountain where Yahweh will hold his seat. And then you have this mountain of opposition, the mountain of the north, which is always the adversary, or the mountain of night, the mountain of darkness, that says enough for me, I think. But yeah, I think in the Bible, there's a few times where you get these two mountains standing against each other. I'm blanking on the passage references, but sometimes Mount Sinai is referred to that way. It's the mountain of God versus this other thing, or I will have the mountain, but you want this. And Yahweh has clearly staked his claim and what's going to end up being the top. And these stories are talking about something else that is not of Yahweh.
Okay, thank you for that. Another parallel would be that Baal organizes for his dwelling Hadd. I think that I'm assuming that's how it will be pronounced. So he organized for his dwelling Had to be arranged for his place. For his palace. Baal slaughters large livestock and small. He slaughters bulls and rams, year-old calves, sheep in droves, and kids. He invites his siblings into his house, his kin within his palace. He invites the 70 sons of Athirat. He offers the gods rams, offers the goddesses eves, or I don't know how to pronounce this. It's E-W-E-S. Yeah, okay.
Use that's sheep.
Oh, thank you. I never seen this word before. He offers the gods bulls, offers the goddesses cows. He offers the gods thrones, offers the goddesses seats. Now, we can compare this to so many passages, but let's go briefly. Deuteronomy 32:8. Remember the ancient days. Bear in mind the years of the past generations. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up humankind, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the heavenly assembly. For the Lord's allotment is his people, Jacob is his special possession. And this speaks about same number of 70, like the base Bell cycle does. Or, for example, if we will go to Judges 9:5, they paid him 70 silver shekels out of temple of Baal Berith. Abimelech then used the silver to hire some lawless, dangerous man as his followers. He went to the father's home in Ophrah and murdered his half-brothers, the 70 legitimate sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. Or if we will go to Genesis 10:5, we see all this genealogy of all these people groups, and there are 70. Or if we will go to Numbers 11:6, but if you're going to deal with me like this, then kill me immediately. If I have found favor in your sight, then do not let me see my trouble. The Lord said to Moses, gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know are elders of the people and officials over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting. Let them take their position there with you. And as we know, 70 was also mentioned when Jesus sent the disciples. Some translations say 72, but some of them say 70. So again, there's this parallel, not just when it comes to mountains as cosmic geography and important locations, not only parallels between Baal's or El's attributes and Yahweh. We also see numbers being important, that they would parallel. So this should help us both as people who are believers and non-believers, or believers in some other religions, including, I don't know, people who love mythologies and still believe in the ancient gods, because there's an overall neo-paganism rise in the whole world. This will help us to say, hey, it doesn't mean necessarily one people group took from another for their scriptures, but actually that this is intentionally used to show cross-references to the original ancient audience, so because they would know what they're doing. They already heard about different symbols, different words, different numbers, different mountains, different attributes. They're like, oh, so it's not El anymore, it's not Baal anymore, it's Yahweh. Oh, this number, well, this is actually what it tells me. So they will have this ancient context given to them immediately when they will hear the message or read something like that, because they lived in these times. They didn't need further exegesis like we need nowadays. So I don't know if you want to say anything on the importance of all these symbols, names, places, locations, including numbers, when it comes to paralleling the Old Testament or the whole Bible with some of the other ancient texts, and why, if someone would come and ask you a question, let's say it's an atheist, well, the Bible basically plagiarized and stole so many ideas. How can we respond to such a accusation?
Yeah, I think there's a shared, some shared thoughts and shared context there. But again, what they describe is quite a bit different. Of course, Genesis 10 and the Table of Nations is part of where the Bible draws 70 for a number of other things. Why 70 disciples are sent out to preach the gospel, and some other things like that. It's not, but it's not represented the same way. Like there's a similar idea, but what they're saying about it is just not the same. And I would throw this out there. I've heard this recently, and if there's any truth to it, I think it proves that the genesis of the ideas is the other ways around. And I haven't researched this a lot, but as far as linguistics go and tracing what the Bible says, I think I find it very, very interesting. It was pointed out to me recently that the name Japheth and the Greek and Roman names Iopater, which becomes Jupiter when it's Germanized, had the same root letters, depending on how you spell it, IPT or JPT. So I wonder, of the 70 nations that came out after the ark and they spread to the nations, and Japheth goes off and lives somewhere else, was he seen as a tribal deity almost? And did that actually spawn the other stories? That would be exactly the opposite way around of what most people say is the connection to the Bible. It would also explain how in some of these myths, especially around the Mediterranean Sea and the basin, why none of them seem to have creation, but it comes out of, well, a lot of it comes out of watery chaos. When did we see that happen? We actually see that twice in the Bible, depending on when you position it. So, it's the old saying that correlation is not the same as causation, right? They can be related, but we need to make sure that we get the order of the relation the right way around. I'm not convinced that the Bible plagiarized. I think there's a shared history that diverged, but the Bible, I mean, the more we look into it, the more the Bible lines up. And that's all I have to say for the rest of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're pretty much done. We did a thorough job of summarizing the Baal or Baal cycle and responding to different parallels when it comes to the Old Testament. I think we can switch to another epic, which will be the Epic of Kirta, which has another name, the Legend of King Keret. So again, maybe we can start again with dating, with how many tablets are there, and then summarizing the story.
Yeah, so this again comes from about the same period. They think that this came in the late period of Ugarit and the late Bronze Age. It seems to have a little bit of revision, but we're looking at somewhere between 1500 to 1200 BC. It is 9 columns on 3 tablets, so it's about half the length of the Baal cycle, or even a little less than that. Generally, this is better preserved, but there is some stuff at the top of the tablets that's been damaged. So if you get into the text of it, there's points where you just have to jump. The cool thing is that in this story in particular, there's a lot of repetition. So once we get a few lines in order, we can kind of tell what comes before it because it's repeated later, and we're able to backfill some of the information. So this one's a little more cohesive. We can get the pattern of the story a little bit better. A little bit about the name of the main character is King Keret, who comes from Ugarit or somewhere in the area. We're not sure about the date exactly. It seems to be an older story that was carried forward. The name Keret, you might see it as Keret, you might see it as Kirta. Basically, it's not a common name that we have in other Semitic languages. The root is the KRT. You see that repeated. Keret, I believe, is basically applying Hebrew grammar to make a name. And I believe Kirta is taking Mesopotamian grammar to fill out a name, which is why they're similar but different. You can hear it in Keret or Kirta. I might call him Kirta more often, mostly because I feel like talking about King Keret is I'm in VeggieTales. I'm talking about a vegetable here, and a carrot. So I might call him Kirta a little more often. I might go back and forth as we do this.
Hey, what if it's maybe Keret? Then completely, depending on vowels, then completely different pronunciation.
Well, it is, and in the name too, you would normally pronounce the second syllable or the last syllable heavier. It's where the emphasis is. So you have carrot or carrot. Anyways, it's a thing. It's fun. Yeah, King Keret. There we go. So it's found in this location. It's found amongst the other texts. It's part of an epic and part of a tale. And there's some things that have to do with this king and his life. And there's also a lot of conversation and influence with the gods. And that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Yeah, I can also read what I found out about this epic. Significant portions of the Kirta legend are missing from tablets 2 and 3. Like Paul was saying, the legend contains 2 major cycles, both of which engage themes of loss and recovery. The first one has to deal with Kirta's loss, and here I think and hope we can make some parallels to Job. And the second one deals with loss, but also recovery of Kirta's health. And then we see the twist by the end of the story. And here, there's some parallels to King David. And it's interesting how the gods of King Kirta's life are both blessing and destroying or punishing him more severely than Yahweh does in the account of the book of Job. even after Kirta is blessed and recovered, there seems to always be another tragedy in his life. So it's a messed up story. It's a sad story what the guy goes through. Whenever there's an uphill and he seems there's no way out, there is a way out, and then he's enjoying only for a season, and then everything is being seems to be destroyed, and he always has to worry about something that will happen further down the road. Do you want to briefly, or I don't know how much time you want to spend expounding on these two stories, and then I can read of the parallels I found between the this epic and the Old Testament.
Yep, I'll say a couple things about it here. So first of all, for this legend or the epic, it's a little shorter and the text is in a little bit better condition. So if you search, there's actually a few recordings of people reading this, and you can listen to it in less than half an hour. And out there, especially for people that are sort of in the divine council arena. And if you're a fan of Lord of Spirits, actually just a couple months ago on the Great Tales podcast, Andrew Stephen Damick and Stephen DeYoung go through the whole story and they read it along with Richard Rowland. So I would highly recommend that. And I think with these stories as well, I don't know if our friend Josh Davidson is kicking around, but I'm sure he loves it. I think with a story, they're meant to be told, and hearing them is as important as reading them. So you can look up the Epic of Keret or the Legend of Kirta and probably find a place where you can hear it. I'm going to give us a summary now, and then we can compare some things. And as Nico said, I think there's a couple of places that compare to the Bible and some characters. There's one that strikes me in particular, but we'll get there in a minute. So basic of the plot of the story. King Keret is deeply sorrowful at the start. What has happened is his wife has died. He has no heir. It's not completely clear if he had sons that died as well, or because his wife died, he's never given a son. But basically, he's all alone. And being a king, he has no way to carry forward his kingship. He laments his fate before the gods. And in response, El appears to him in a dream and gives him a set of instructions. The instructions include to march to the kingdom of Udom, where he's going to claim his wife, who is Hooray, a princess who is very beautiful. And El promises success and blesses Kirta with divine favor, as long as Kirta fulfills a vow to offer sacrifices when everything is said and done. Okay. So Kirta has this dream, wakes up, is great. I've got a plan. I can have an heir. Let's go do this thing. And he manages to lead a peaceful campaign. His army surrounds Udum, and the king agrees to the marriage without war. Kirta weds Hooray and has many children, including male heirs. And this fulfills his hope for a royal line. Sounds great, right? Well, there's a problem. And Kirta forgot to give the sacrifices, so he doesn't fulfill his vow and promise. So years later, Kirta is struck with a mysterious illness, and his whole court, his family mourns, his children pray and weep. And it becomes clear that this is divine punishment for breaking his vow. El is initially angry because he remembers the promise not being filled, but after intercession from some of the other gods, and because they see that there's an illness and some other consequences, El shows mercy and heals Kirta using some magical intervention from another figure. And then as Kirta recovers, his son Yasubu tries to usurp the throne, declaring his father unfit to rule. But Kirta rebukes him sharply, affirming his divine legitimacy and the injustice of a rebellion like that. And the tale kind of comes off because we've lost the end of it. But basically, it seems like Kirta continued to reign and that El's justice is upheld. One thing as well, one of the reasons why the gods um, seek El to be restored is that the land, it's not just Kirta that gets sick, but the land hits famine and there's issues with fertility, and all the people notice. And in fact, the other gods start losing out on sacrifices, and they're like, "What's going on?" Actually, this king is sick, but that sickness is causing sickness in the land as well. So it kind of comes full circle that way. Yeah, it's pretty interesting that there are some parallels here from the beginning, and also he has a son that comes, and one of the sons sort of seems to make he comes to like pray and like talk to his father and talks about how sick he is and it's a bad thing, but he also sort of mocks him. And between Kirta losing his whole family at the start and then this friend that's blaming Kirta for everything, it really reminded me of the story of Job, when Job gets sick and he loses his house and he loses his family. And in the middle of it, they tell Job that he's doing everything wrong, but then God shows up afterwards to say, "Well, actually, I did all this, for my own pleasure." But the outcome of God's judgment for Job and the proof of his faithfulness versus what's happening with Kirta and the sacrifice and sort of the fickleness of the gods, even though there's a similar pattern, I think they tell us different things about these gods and what they respond to. So they're similar, but they're also quite a bit different at the same time.
Yeah, when I was reading this epic, oh well, of course you have to feel bad for the guy. And again, to me, this story reminds me as a combo of the story of Job because of his constant suffering, and also the way how his son uh, turned against him reminded me of David and Absalom. So this is what I comment. This is the gist of the messages I exchanged with Paul a couple of days ago. When I was reading this, and I was like, "Wow, this guy, the king, really suffered from from his own deity." He was restored later. So I was talking to Paul. I was like, "Paul, do you think then, if we know that certain portions of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, and especially in the first 11 chapters, they're all theologically and spiritually true, but that they may not be in every detail historically true, like in the most wooden, dry, direct sense. They're true, but like, do you think it was like, just for example, do you think it was really 24 hours where that it took Adam to be created, to name all the animals, to walk with God in the garden, to be acquainted with everything and everyone, to notice that he's missing a companion, to be put to sleep, and Eve to come out? So those 24 hours don't have to be literal 24 hours, but they're true that they're significant a day. Or that chaotic monster, Leviathan. I doubt anyone believes that there is this monster that is as big as the half of the planet hiding in the cosmic sea, as portrayed and explained to be. Yet it spiritually and theologically portrays the very real existence of Satan as the great arch enemy of God. So in that fashion, the story of Job, I'm not saying it's not true. God forbid, I'm not saying. But I would just think, if there's so many parallels with the Old Testament, especially the first 11 chapters in the pagan accounts, and if the Bible speaks so many things that parallels these other accounts, and if portions of the Bible are done as polemics to resemble other stories, but to correct them and to always point to Yahweh, then I was thinking, well, because the story of the king Keret is probably older than the book of Job. So I'm thinking, could they have the same source, but different nations narrated the story in a different way, gave the guy different names, or maybe this would be a well-known story that maybe people will share as tradition in their own clan, in their own nation, but it will be slightly different in every different account. So maybe here's a guy with this name, then there is a guy with this name. Here he's a wealthy nobleman. Here he's king, which doesn't matter. What matters is that it could be a story that will basically tell you, hey, here's the story how someone was humbled, lost everything and everyone, but because they're faithful to their God, they got blessed. So to me, that seems like it could be, which of course would not mean that the book of Job is not true. But when I was speaking with Paul about this, I was like, hey, have you ever thought? And I wouldn't think about this. I was just reading on Saturday while I was working. I was reading about this at work. I'm like, do you think then that if they share a similar root, these two stories, Book of Job and King Keret or Kirta, then could it be that these are more written stories that will portray theological truths like, hey, despite of any tragedy in your life, depend and trust on your deity. And in our case, Yahweh. So it's a very interesting question. I'm not saying there's a perfect answer out there, nor am I saying that Job is historically not true. I'm just saying because they share some similar points and roots that, hey, maybe like for example, when Jesus would give parables, was there literally the prodigal son? Was there literally the good Samaritan? Or Jesus was through stories, speaking truth and giving theological messages to the audience, even though maybe there may not have been a literal prodigal son? What are your thoughts on this before I start giving some parallels?
Yeah, I think there's some good comparisons. First, I gotta say, I think you might get in trouble for being a non-literalist or even advocating that. But I know we're having a little bit of fun here, but also I think there's a comparison, and if we take everything wooden literally, we might get ourselves in some trouble. Um, two things about what you said. I'm aware that the Greek text of the book of Job has a note in it that Job is a grandson of Esau. So, if that's true, and based on the timelines, it's possible that Job lived and the story was written about him around the same time that this legend of Kirta was written, and they're contemporary to each other, which is interesting. I also think that there are some places where they are similar and some places where they're quite a bit different, right? I think the general trend of, if your God gives you an instruction and if you take a vow, you need to fulfill it. Pretty similar. Job doesn't do that, but as a general pattern, if you make a promise to Yahweh, you should, fulfill it. I think that would be upheld. I think across the ancient world, people would think that's a good idea. Um, you get a sense of justice and a sense of mercy in both stories. You get uh, even a betrayal from your family and friends a little bit. So there's a crossover that, like, who can we trust? And these people are supposed to like me, but they don't really like me. Um, and you even get a sense in the story of Job, he is this righteous man, but there are some things he doesn't do quite right, and he's not completely affirmed, but his faithfulness is. God says, I did this to prove his faithfulness. Um, right. I think the biggest difference is that Kirta is being held up as a divine king, and there's divine intervention to keep his rulership and lineage in line. I don't, at least from Job, we don't get that. I think it happens less in the Bible. The one place it does happen is David, of course. I will bless the house of David forever. I will raise up the tabernacle. I will restore the root of Jesse. That comes up over and over. But again, the promise of that is not just some random son that comes along. The fulfillment of that is Jesus Christ, which is quite a bit different. And it's actually an eternal kingship, not just a divine right to be a king in the land. So there are some similarities in what's going on, but there's also a very different outcome ultimately. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to remind the audience, in no way would I try to bring any doubt to, God or God's word. I'm just thinking, I'm just questioning when it comes to the similarities and parallels, if there's something behind this. Okay, so let's continue with parallels. The king Keret's or Kirta's special status is evident in his invitation to the gods to attend his new wedding celebration when he married King Pabil's daughter, Huraya, whatever is her name. In the remarkable scene which follows, the council of gods travels to Kirta's house for the festivities. I found that very cool. Like, here's the band of gods traveling to someone's house to eat and drink. Again, we see the council of the divine council here is called the council of the gods. That just that phrase may match something in the Bible, yet God in the eschaton will drink with his elected bride, and proclaim the victory. So I found that to be interesting. Furthermore, this legend affirms Kirta's close relationship to the divine realm in general and to God El in particular. But it also complicates the nature of these relationships. The gods themselves do not necessarily act together, nor does the divine assembly speak with one voice. A blessing by one deity may have, due to the actions of another deity, unforeseen negative consequences for the blessed person. For example, El's marriage. El blessed the marriage of Kirta, but goddess Athirat cursed the king that led him later to his serious illness. Furthermore, in the marriage blessing that El bestowed upon Kirta, God El twice spoke of Kirta as being greatly honored among the shades of the underworld in the gathered assembly of Ditan. Very interesting. Here, El is referring to Kirta's membership in the company of ancestral royal spirits. Ancient Canaanites, like the authors of the Hebrew Bible, use the word Rephaim to refer to both the ghostly shades of the dead as well as legendary kings. In one part of the Bible, you can hear the mortal king Og of Bashan, one of the last of Rephaim, in Joshua 12:4. But in another book, a ghostly underworld vision is presented that uses Rephaim in a different way. It says, Sheol beneath had been troubled at thee, to meet thy coming in, it is waking up for thee, Rephaim, all chiefs, one of earth, it had raised it from their thrones, all kings of nations. Isaiah 49, this is Young's literal translation version. However, the New Revised Standard Version translation of the same Isaiah 14 passage reads as following: Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. In the Ugaritic tablets, several specific Rephaim were mentioned by name. Many of the humans featured in the Ugaritic mythological writings were considered Rephaim, including a judge named Daniel, which is funny because it almost sounds like Daniel, but it's like an I. Then his son Akwat, alongside King Rapau of Ashtaroth and Erdei, as well as King Kirta of Hubar, and his dynasty's founder named Ditan. Of the last two, the Ugaritic tablets state the following: May Kirta be highly praised in the midst of the Rephaim of the underworld, in the assembly of Ditan's company. Given that Rephaim were divine ancestor figures and the kingdom of Ugarit was biased in favor of Baal, it is natural that the Rephaim of Ugarit had a close relationship with Baal Ugarit's patron god. This could have impacted Ugarit's theology concerning the loyalties of the Rephaim. Other cities and their respective theologians may not have believed that the Rephaim were associated with Baal and Anat. Legendary kings and heroes from other cities may have been partial to other Canaanite gods and goddesses, and therefore the Rephaim of those cities may have been warriors for El or Asherah or Astarte, not to mention their mysteries role under the sun goddess. So I wanted to read this because I found these quotations from a couple or a few different scholars, and I think they're super important as the context. Now, to me, this was very fascinating that, again, Al spoke like this when it comes to King Kirta. He says that he's being greatly honored among the shades of the underworld. And we know, as we said, that these are Rephaim, the evil spirits of the divine kings or even giants, in the gathered assembly of Ditan. So now, Paul, do you want to help us explain more about Ditan? And as I was asking you before we went live, could there be any linguistic or even spiritual or theological connection with the place called Dothan in the Bible? Because this is where Joseph was thrown by the brothers, and it says that he was in the pit or he was in a cistern. So I'm just trying to think, could there be something when it comes to Ditan or Dothan, and also being in the pit? Could there be any relationship between these, or I'm maybe reading too much between the lines?
No, I absolutely think that there is a relationship here. I'm going to read an article here from the DDD, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, that has an entry, and then I want to make a comment afterwards. So, Dedan. Dedan is one of the ancestors of the royal families of Ugarit and Assyria. According to Ugaritic texts, he was deified. In both Ugaritic and Akkadian texts, he's also named Daytan or Ditan, Daitan, I guess. The name can be related to Akkadian Ditanu, Didanu, which means bison, or Akkadian Datnu, warlike. It also appears as a personal name in the Old Testament. It's also the name of a tribe living in the western part of ancient Mesopotamia, first mentioned at the end of the 3rd millennium BC. The name Ditanu appears as a component in personal names in the 2nd millennium BCE. The names of 2 kings from the 1st dynasty of Babylon, and here it seems to indicate the tribe of that name. So, in addition to this, what I wanted to say is that, so we've got some records where it seems to be an ancestor and related to some kings. But I will also say that we have a place with this name. And quite often there were special places marked out where people had spiritual experiences, and that's why they got recorded, or where altars were built, and they became sacred places. I wouldn't be surprised if the place where Joseph was thrown was either because these people were known for being there, or it kept the name because of some ancestor that had been carried over and deified, or a spiritual experience that happened, and then the place and the person were tied together in memory.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll continue with the parallels. Kirta's son, Ilhu, responds to Kirta's illness by pointedly asking his father the following. This is very interesting. Shall even you, O father, alas, die as men? Different translations say mortals. Or shall gods die? Shall the offspring of the kind one not live? I mean, this is Psalm 82, 101. Kirta's disease proves him to be all too human. Kirta, as king, partakes of 2 realms, but does not fit neatly into either. The king is a son of El, who enjoys the fellowship of the gods, but he is not divine. Royal ideology establishes connections between monarchs and their gods, but King Kirta and his legend also establish links between Kirta and humanity. Okay, before I switch to the next parallel, do you think that this portion also resembles Psalm 82 when his son says, "Oh, you'll die just like mortals or just like men"? I mean, it's like so similar to Psalm 82.
Yeah, there's certainly shared language there, and I think this thing about divine kings and rulers gets bled over. There's a relationship. You can also think about it, when Christ quotes this, he's talking to the leaders of the Jewish people who would have had this role as the closest thing in Israel. Yahweh is their king, and they don't have a divine ruler the same way. But the Jewish leaders were put in as the head as priests, as representatives of Yahweh, and so they carry that role. Um, uh, Shared concept, and I don't think it's a mistake. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, the next parallel is a short citation. It says, "The mountain of Baal weeps for you, O Father. Zaphon, the holy stronghold, the mighty stronghold groans for you, the stronghold broad of span." I don't want to talk about Mountain Zaphon again because we mentioned it a while ago. But again, we see here another parallel with cosmic geography and with the Old Testament sections. The next one is that Kirta prepares to resume normal life after his illness. But no sooner has he retaken his place upon the throne that he has to confront a revolt by his heir apparent Yasub. And this, again, like I said, reminds me so much of King David and his son Absalom. Yasub's speech reveals, however, another perspective on Kirta's reign. His complaints amount to more than a reproach of Kirta for having become bedridden. Yasub strikes at the heart of royal ideology. If a king fails to uphold justice, he is not being kingly. For Yasub, his son, the institution of kingship must be honored, even if this means deposing his father. And this is also a citation from Yasub rebuking his father, Kirta. He says, "Listen, please, O Kirta, the noble one. Be alert and pay attention. Like the most ruthless of raiders, you rule, and like invaders, you govern. You have caused your hand to fall down in slackness. You do not judge the cause of the widow, nor try the case of the oppressed. You do not banish those who plunder the poor. You do not feed the orphan before you, nor the widow behind your back." Again, this is so much Psalm 82 when God is walking in the council of the small g gods, and he's rebuking them for not governing properly and justly and forgetting the poor, the widows, and the sickly. And I'm like, wow, this is like, again, this is a big parallel. It's not just one word. This is a big parallel. Do you want to comment on that, or you're good? No? Okay, you're good. Okay. I found more from this website, intertextual.bible, but some of these are already saying what I said. So, for example, when it says, "Then Keret the noble raises his voice and says, 'Listen, Lady Huria,'" his wife, right? New wife, "'prepare a lamb so I may eat, a yearling so I may dine.' Lady Huria or Huraya, I don't know, listens. She prepares a lamb and he eats, a yearling and he dines. After one day and then another, King Kirta returns to his former place. He sits again on the throne of kingship. On the days, and then he sits with authority. His son Yasib also sits in the palace, and his inward parts instruct him." So theologians found this to parallel Psalm 16:7 that says, well, I'll start with verse 5. "The Lord is the portion of my possession and my cup. You make my future secure. It is as if I had been given fertile fields or received a beautiful tract of land. I will praise the Lord who guides me. Yes, during the night my kidneys instruct me. I set the Lord before me continually because he's at my right hand. I will not be shaken." Another one would be another section from the legend of Kirta. It says, "Take a pigeon, bird of sacrifice, pour wine into a silver basin, into a gold basin, honey. Ascend to the top of the lookout, mount the city wall shoulder. Raise your hand towards the sky, sacrifice to Baal El, your father, adore Baal with your sacrifice, Dagon's son with your offering. Then let Kirta descend from the rooftops. Ready rations for the city, wheat for the whole house of Kubur. Have bread for 5 months, baked provisions for as many as 6. Then let the army supplied go forth. Theologians found something similar in Jeremiah 19:13. I'll start with 12. I, the Lord, say, this is how I will deal with the city and its citizens. I will make it like Tophet. The houses in Jerusalem and the houses of the kings of Judah will be defiled by dead bodies, just like this place, Tophet. For they offered sacrifices to the stars and poured out drink offerings to other gods on the roofs of those houses. Then Jeremiah left Tophet, where the Lord had sent him to give that prophecy. He went to the Lord's temple and stood in its courtyard and called out to all the people. Then there are more examples of King Keret's son. I don't want to go too much into that because some of the quotations are very lengthy. But I also want to say this as a part of summary, because we'll be almost done with the episode next 5-10 minutes. I also want to say or criticize these Canaanite deities when they're compared to Yahweh. They keep showing that they're lacking on power, on authority, on their might, on divine attributes, on everything. So in this narrative, those summoned by El 7 times, the gods and goddesses are either unable or unwilling to dispel Keret's disease. Imagine that happening to Yahweh. If you're not listening, then you'll be put to Tartarus, or you'll be thrown down to earth and waiting judgment. There's no negotiation with Yahweh and the fallen ones. Here, I'm not talking about people. Here, I'm talking with spiritual entities or gods. Yet El, he's unable. He's not that. He's impotent to deal with all the other gods. He's summoning them and telling them to go deal with Kirta to help him be healed. 7 times they're refusing, and he can't do anything. Yet he's the head of the pantheon. So given their lack of response, El deals with the crisis himself. He creates a female exorcist, Shatikwat, however is her name to be pronounced, I don't know, who then goes as instructed by God El to the ailing monarch. Touching Kirta's head with her staff, she heals him. What is your either summary or commentary when it comes to the legend, to the epic of Kirta? What are your thoughts based on what you said lately?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things, like you've made some good comparisons there. We've talked about Job. We've talked about some of the stuff with kings. I think people that take this stuff as a cursory glance and say that they're all the same, they're skipping out some very important details. Whether it's because you don't believe there's a spiritual world and this is all just made up story, or you're not reading the character of what's being presented. Clearly, at least from the God's point of view, or what they're saying about the gods and how they're being representative in these stories versus Yahweh and Jesus Christ in the Bible, they're not the same. I can't see how you would think they're the same. Maybe there's commonalities because of culture and language, but there's just so much that it's not the same figure being represented. Like you said, like El needs to rely on all these other people or listens. Yahweh's not like that. He seems to evolve people, but clearly he has dominion and authority through it all at the same time. And also think about this. We didn't talk about this so much in the Baal cycle, but it comes up here, right? A little bit between a god and their people and the relationship. Like, you look how fickle these gods are with some of their things. This is why the 10 Commandments are mind-blowing, because God comes and tells his people, listen, you're not going to have anyone else before me. There is nobody else. And here's 10 things I want you to do or not do. Things will go well with you if you follow this. Whereas maybe El wants a sacrifice and I'm going to get healed and we're going to be okay. Maybe today my life will not end because Anat is feeling good and doesn't have a blood rage. Just the structure of this stuff and how they communicate is so very different. And then also between a father and his son, you just said it in the phrase a minute ago, but Baal is sometimes called the son of El, sometimes the son of Dagon, somehow he's a descendant of El, but the relationship there isn't completely clear. And then as we looked at the Baal cycle, they're at odds with each other, and even after the first battle, the son has to demand things from the father several times to get kind of what he wants or needs. Compare that to the Holy Trinity and the Son and the Father. That in the beginning the Word was, and it was with God, and the Word was God, right? And God saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased," in Jesus Christ. The relationship within the spiritual world there with Yahweh Most High within the Trinity is so very, very different from what we see with these other characters. And I think if you're going to try to equate these and say that they're the same or they're just copies of stories and plagiarism, you're off base. I don't know where you're getting that from. I will say this didn't come up earlier in the notes. There is a scholarly theory thread out there right now that the book of Joshua is a plagiarism of the legend of Kirta. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this or not. And
Wait. Oh,
yeah,
which legend? I didn't hear the last word.
so the book of Joshua is a plagiarism of the legend of Kirta, the one we just covered.
Wow. Okay.
And the reason they say this is kind of because of the Battle of Jericho and the Battle of Ai, is that someone does something that God said no to, so they're punished, and it goes very badly for a lot of people. But then also there is this triumphal victory where the army marches, that at one point they're interrupted by a divine intervention on their march. They get to the place that they're supposed to battle or conquer. It's not traditional siege warfare, and they win by unconventional means. Is that a plagiarism? I don't think that.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I don't think I heard this. Yeah, I mean, yes, it has some similar elements, but we're not talking about a story that is on a couple of or a few pages. Then, if you see similarities in every third sentence, then you're like, oh yeah, this is suspicious. But you're talking about a decent sized book, and it has few points that may be similar in the narrative. I mean, yeah, I think that scholars also call this parallelomania when you try finding so many similarities between different ancient texts, because there will be inevitably so many stories. I can tell you stories from my vacation or from my experience in church, and then you can tell me, oh, something similar happened to me in my church. That doesn't mean we stole from each other. It's inevitable that, like, stories will have so many similar points, you know, even between different eras and geographical locations, tribes, even religions, that, yeah, that doesn't have to mean anything unless it's like word from word taken, even spelling, even exact deities, characters, and maybe with some slight changes. I'm like, I don't know about that. Anyway, I hope people will not be upset as Amber was upset with me when she said, hey, the book of Job, what she said. She said, let me go back to the, I don't know what she said. Basically, when I was saying, what could it be that book of Job is not necessarily historically true, or maybe everything that is true. And she said, yes, it is true. So yeah, I hope people understand I'm not trying to bring doubt in God's word or anything when it comes to your faith and relationship with God. I'm just thinking when it comes to the history, when it comes to theology, could it be that, certain portions were, trying to portray a more theological message than every detail to be exactly as it happened. But yeah, I'm not doubting, or nor am I trying to bring people to doubt the word of God. I just want to say one more thing before I give you if you want to do the concluding part, or I can do it. In both of these stories, so both of the Baal cycle and the Epic of Kirta, we saw another thing that just brings us to conclusion that neither Baal nor El are these supreme deities. They're very limited. The last example I'll give, that in both of these stories, El has these revelations slash dreams that are given to him, right? In the first narrative, in the Baal cycle, El has this dream or revelation about Baal. And in the second one, he has about King Kirta. And I was thinking, well, what does it mean if a chief deity, not just, I mean, even any deity, but imagine even chief deities having dreams. To me, it shows lacking in different ways compared to Yahweh. And I thought of three. They could be more. First, El needs to rest and sleep, unlike Yahweh, just the basic one. The second one, El doesn't necessarily proclaim the future in the same fashion where Yahweh does, who supremely rules the main events in the cosmos in our lives. I didn't say he determines everything in our life. I'm not a proponent of hard determinism, but I'm saying that Yahweh is sovereign when it comes to the main events happening in the lives of the cosmos and people, where El, he doesn't know what's happening. He needs guidance through these dreams and revelations. And then he's like, oh, aha, well, now I have new information, therefore I will act according to this information. He's lacking. He doesn't know what will happen. Yahweh doesn't have those issues. And the last thing I was thinking about when I was comparing his dreams and how Yahweh is in the control of every course in history, is that if these prophetic dreams are coming from any other source, we can call it realm, mind, another person, another deity, because if dreams are sent as messages, they are not coming in a vacuum. They must be sent by a mind, by intelligence. Then who is that someone? That someone who is sending a message to someone else will either have to be on the same level of El, or maybe even bigger one. Yahweh doesn't need anyone's counsel. He doesn't need anyone's advice. He doesn't need anyone telepathic message to like, oh, okay, thank you for giving me that new information I didn't know. Oh, I had a dream, and because of this dream, I will know what move to make on this cosmic chessboard. God doesn't need that. God is not lacking anything. So when I was combining those of these stories, and in both of these stories, El had to have a dream in which he received new information, revelation. I'm like, wow, praise God. Yahweh does not operate in that way. He doesn't need my help. He doesn't need my instruction. He already knows everything that happened, that is happening, that will happen. So that was my concluding part when it comes to analyzing El and Baal with Yahweh, how El and Baal lack so much compared to Yahweh. And I'll just say this, Friday we're having a new episode with Sean. Sunday we'll see who will be our guest. I'm still negotiating. I need this guest to confirm if he's busy. If not, we'll see to prepare something else. I want to thank everyone for just giving us time and paying attention to this. Please keep liking and subscribing. Paul, you can take any amount of time. It can be 10 seconds or 10 minutes, doesn't matter, to do the concluding part of the episode.
Yeah, well, I hope people have seen some value in this and our explanation. I would encourage you, if you're a student of the Bible, and especially if you're trying to understand things like the Old Testament, it comes from a different time, a different culture. It can be a little weird. But if you want to understand how special it is, I think reading these texts and what was going on at that time with other stories and how they thought about God and spirituality and life, I think it shows us how special the Bible and Yahweh really are. The other thing is these are important on a more scholarly level because they've helped us to understand ancient Hebrew better. The Hebrew language has been around for a long time, but it's changed. And ancient Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, modern Hebrew aren't quite the same. So this has impacted how we understand the language of the Bible. And you can just hear some of the things and where they come from. But for me, I think they're interesting the most, or the most helpful in just seeing how special, the story of the Bible is of our faith, and there are parallels, but really, ultimately, there's no one like Jesus Christ, right? There's just nobody else like that, and I hope it's there. It's worth studying. I think there's some good scholarly stuff out there for the people that want to say it's all the same and it's all made up. It's like, well, maybe you should read this a little closer. And maybe don't be so manic, as you were saying before. We can dig a little deeper, not just be superficial about it. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that people enjoyed what we talked about and the parallel, and it helps you understand better. And I'll say this: Nico said, like, subscribe. I think he's doing great work. He didn't say it, but go to his Patreon, throw a couple bucks in, buy him a coffee, help out. He's got some costs to keep this going and make life easier. Yeah. I appreciate what Nico's been doing and the guests he has. And if you're able to support, I know he would appreciate it immensely. Thank you for having me back. And good night, everybody.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Paul. And it's so funny because you gave me compliment, you and other guys, a few days ago in our podcast messenger group, and I messed it up at the beginning of the intro. I don't know if because I've been sleep deprived, I did a bad job. I was like, wow, Paul just gave me a compliment the other day, a few days ago, and I messed up the intro. But whatever, praise God for the flaws and virtues. Praise God for friends like you, like Sean, like Ember, everyone else. I appreciate all of your company, friendship, prayers, encouragement, because I would never want to do this alone. It will never be the same, nor it will have the same effect on the audience. So I also praise God for people like you, for also your knowledge, your scholarship, your sources, your sacrifice to, I know you're in the busy process and we don't want to spill the beans publicly, but we know you're in a tough and busy season of your life, yet you found time for the audience, because you've been telling me every once in a while, you tell me, hey, we have to make a sequel. We did Babylonian mythology. We have to do Canaan. I'm like, okay, yeah, we will. Finally, we did it. So praise God for that, and praise God for people like you. May God bless you, reward you, and fulfill the dreams of your heart, and be glorified even more through your life, Paul. May God also bless all of you. I hope this episode served you as educational, yes, but also to learn and to be strengthened more in God's word and in His identity as child of God. Be encouraged, be strengthened, go and serve your Lord, and have a wonderful week, all of you. Thank you. God bless.